More than once, it became a hot potato for the Harper government. Now the Trudeau Liberals are looking for middle ground to keep the peace between those who champion Canada's temporary foreign worker program and those with grave concerns about it. An overhaul is expected later this month, and for many, it can't come soon enough. Joining us now to consider what the next steps should be. Here are Marie Butriani. She is former Ontario Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, now Dean of the Chang School at Ryerson University. Ron Bonnet, President, Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Richard Lyle, President, Residential Construction Council of Ontario, RESCON for short. And Philip Cross, Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And it's good to have everybody around our table for this discussion here tonight on TVO. Philip, I'm not going to assume that everybody knows what this program is, even though it's been very hot and in the news a lot lately. So let's start from first principles here. Give us the overview of what this program is essentially all about.
This program is essentially designed to solve short-term labor problems. It certainly is not designed to be a long-term solution to big problems we have in the labor market: aging of the population, declining quality of the labor force, technological change. Those are all long-term things that involve millions of people. Temporary foreign workers is about being directed at a micro level, solving a problem for an individual firm, an individual worker. You're talking about tens of thousands of people, not the millions that are involved in the total labor market. So it's a very specific, short-term, targeted solution.
It became quite a hot topic when Stephen Harper and his government were still in power and resulted in their making an attempt to overhaul it. What was the problem they were trying to fix?
Well, the problem was the program had become too popular. It was being used extensively, particularly in BC and Alberta at the height of the resource boom, to bring in workers to remote areas in the resource sector. It probably worked, and in doing that, some employers appeared to have abused it and were using it to just be a source of cheap labor, so they didn't have to boost wages. So Kenney brought in three fundamental reforms.
This is Jason Kenney, the former minister.
That largely involved a raise, for example, that you had to pay $1,000 as an employer to make an application. So that really dampened the attractiveness of this program as a source of cheap labor. They brought in some other reforms, but the major thrust of which was to dampen the use of this. Of course, by the time the government got around to introducing these measures, the problem was in the process of disappearing anyways because of the collapse of the Alberta oil sector.
The Conference Board of Canada did a recent report on this. We're going to share some of the highlights of that report now, and then I'll get your views around this table on that. In 2014, more than 360,000 people had their temporary foreign worker permit take effect. That's a 64% increase compared with 10 years earlier. The temporary foreign worker program accounted for 1/4 of individuals who were granted a temporary work permit in the year 2014. Canada could see its foreign worker population continue to rise as a result of more international students entering the country and recently negotiated free trade agreements. Okay, Marie, let me bring you in at this point. As you have watched the attempts to clean this thing up and make it so that the program has a decent foundation in the country and decent support, do you think the changes that have been made are on balance good?
On balance, they're good, but I would say they went too far. The purpose of the temporary foreign workers program is to get labor quickly. So it defeats the purpose to add more red tape. We don't want these workers to be going somewhere else. We need them here. We don't want the businesses that hire them to go somewhere else because they can't find labor. So although the intent was good, some of the changes were good, but too much red tape, Stephen, I think that's a big problem for employers.
How about you, Ron? What do you think?
Well, I think one of the things we've got to look at is the fact that we have to look at the whole labor situation, not only temporary foreign workers, but also immigration policy, because I think one of the problems we have is there's a number of jobs going unfilled that people want to move to Canada to take those jobs and become permanent tax-paying citizens of the country, but the immigration system hasn't adapted to that. The temporary foreign worker program is designed, like you said, to address those short-term shortages, but some of these things that we're facing are long-term shortages. We've looked at the demand over the next number of years for agriculture. It's going to be huge, and we're going to need workers to fill that. And it's not all going to be solved with temporary foreign workers. We've got to refine immigration policy and immigration processes so that we can bring those long-term workers in.
When you say huge, are you talking hundreds of thousands of people?
Yes. We estimate by 2025 we'll be short about 120,000 people.
In the agriculture sector alone?
Agriculture alone.
So across other sectors, we're talking a lot more than that, obviously. Richard, what's your view on how the thing has changed over the years?
Well, I think it's evolved because of other systemic deficiencies with respect to the way we've planned for and manage immigration and immigration policies, and also some systemic issues with respect to training and apprenticeship. We have very, very low levels of apprenticeship with young people coming out of schools, and that's not looking to get any better. And plus, we also have an aging workforce, certainly in construction, where we're going to be losing quite a few skilled people over the next 10 years, and we really don't have a plan to replace them. So, and I might add too, like for example, in the construction sector, our workforce, a very big part of it is an immigrant workforce. For any number of reasons, but that was sort of the path of least resistance that we took. I mean, and historically there are good reasons for that. We're a country of immigrants and people have come here to build futures. But we've lost our way on the technical and apprenticeship side of things. So there are, we've got self-imposed barriers to apprenticeship and things like that. So, the program is needed. The changes that are happening now are dealing with problems with the last group of changes that happened a few years ago. So the fact is that those changes didn't get it right. These changes won't get it perfectly right. But on a couple of things, I mean, we definitely need better data on who's doing what and what skills do they have.
Well, let me follow up on that with agriculture. Yep. Let's give people who may not be familiar with this, just a real life example of how this works. Somebody owns a farm. They need temporary foreign workers because, the theory is, right, you're supposed to check and see if there are any Canadian-born people who want these jobs first, right?
That's what you do.
That's what you do. You check.
But it's not quite as simple as that either, because depending on what type of farm you have, you might want a permanent worker, somebody who works year-round, or you might want somebody just for a seasonal part of your job. And there is a separate component right now for seasonal workers, and we'd like to see that left pretty much the same as it is, maybe expand it to a few commodities that don't have access to it.
Well, what does it work? You got a farm, you need a temporary foreign worker, so what do you do?
If you need a seasonal worker, you go through a group, it's Farms it's called, that does a lot of the legwork. They sign contracts with foreign governments on how these workers are going to be treated, and that's the way you go through that process. But if you want more permanent workers, then you have to go through the extending temporary foreign worker program.
What would happen to the agricultural sector in this country if temporary foreign workers were not permitted to do that work?
You would see, I think, a collapse, because one of the things you have to remember that temporary foreign workers are only a component of the workforce. It may be 20 or 25% of the total workforce in some of the agriculture and agriculture processing jobs. Well, if those people weren't there, then those Canadian jobs are likely going to disappear, because you can't run the business without having all of those skill sets in place. Whether it's a mushroom farm that brings in people to pick the mushrooms, but all of the other people working on the packing and the planning and the marketing and all of that stuff, all of those jobs are tied to the fact that there's a labor pool there. And I think one of the disappointing things that I see in this discussion is we try and focus in so much on this one small aspect of the labor force without recognizing that it's part of a bigger discussion about what do we want our labor force to look like. Where do temporary workers fit into it? Where does immigration policy fit into it? And where does the apprenticeship and training fit into it, so that we've got skill sets that we can fill all of the jobs? Because there's not one single job in agriculture. There's all kinds of jobs, from the person that's picking the mushrooms to somebody that's fixing that combine that has more technology on it than even in this studio.
Even in the studio?
Even in the studio.
Can you give us a sense, Maria, again, this program became fairly controversial because at one point, I guess a lot of people thought that these were jobs that were being stolen from Canadians who otherwise would have done them. Can we understand how dependent the Canadian economy is on temporary foreign workers?
Tremendously dependent, not only in the agricultural business and in the construction, in the tech, in the natural resources business, in the hospitality business, tremendously dependent. I do agree with Mr. Bonet. This is only one small piece of the problem and the challenge that we face. We are a small country, 34 million. And although per capita we have the highest rate of immigration in the world, and I'm proud of that, I hope we're all proud of that, it's still not enough. We need, according to the Conference Board of Canada, in the next decade, there will be 1 million jobs unfilled. Who is going to fill those, unless we all start having 5 kids each, who's going to fill those jobs?
And I don't think that's about to happen.
And well, it certainly won't with me.
There might be time lag, too.
So I really do think this is, I agree, this is a much more serious problem within the infrastructure of immigration. But what we're doing now with these changes is making it even more difficult. So yes, I agree, solve this small portion of it now quickly so that businesses can get on with their work, but then please look at the bigger picture. We will be crying in 5 years for people, and we won't have planned for it. And then we'll be running on empty, basically.
Philip, again, I think we need a better understanding of why temporary foreign workers take these jobs as opposed to people who are born in Canada or may have lived here for a long time. Why don't apparently Canadian citizens want these jobs?
Well, I think the best example is agriculture. I mean, that's one of the oldest parts of this program. We've been bringing in temporary foreign workers in agriculture for much longer than most other industries, and it's never raised a bit of controversy because Canadians clearly are not willing to do those jobs.
Why not? What is it about those jobs that Canadian-born people don't want them anymore?
Difficult, backbreaking. There's other types of jobs. My mother was being looked at in her dying days with dementia. She was being looked at by Filipinos. Canadians weren't willing to do that work. Young people today, that's not the type of job that's interesting to them. There's also the matter of agricultural jobs are in rural areas. Kids today are in towns. They want to go to school in towns. There just isn't the labor force in some rural areas. So you're going to have to bring in temporary foreign workers.
That is that's a sweeping observation. Are you really comfortable making that sweeping an observation about what kinds of jobs Canadians are or are not prepared to do?
In those areas that I just cited, yes. In other areas where and this is the areas that were controversial leading up to the reforms by Minister Kenney, it was fast food restaurants. It was changing beds in hotels. There, the argument became, why can't you just raise the wage and you can get people? I mean, there's nothing fundamentally difficult or impossible about getting Canadians to do that. So, no, I don't want to make sweeping statements about all these jobs, but I think in certain areas, in certain industries, we can say, I think it's pretty clear Canadians will not work, for example, on farms.
Richard, are there misconceptions about the way this program works in your area of the economy?
Well, it doesn't work terribly well. I mean, in our industry, you've got half of the industry is really a renovation industry. A lot of people don't realize half of the dollar volume in residential construction, for example, is not the sort of new subdivisions or the high-rise towers that you see. There's a huge informal economy there that's quite healthy. But in terms of where we're going, as I mentioned before, we see some considerable problems and a need for transparency, a need for data, a need for further action in the school system.
What are the kind of jobs, though, that temporary foreign workers perform in the construction industry?
Usually the ones where, like for example, in the mud trades, in tile, bricklaying, framing, drywalling, the harder slugging type work.
And would you share Philip's observation that Canadians just don't want to do those jobs anymore in the main?
Well, I think that's changed now. They're used to, the parents don't want their kids going into those professions anymore. I think that's changed fundamentally. What's happening is the pathways aren't there. There's no clear routes. It's very hard to, apprenticeship positions are very hard to get. You're not getting the sufficient introduction through the high school system into some of the trades. I mean, there are efforts there, but nowhere near to the extent that we need in our industry to ultimately fill those spots. I mean, if you consider the fact that the average age of an apprentice is 28 years old and less than, I think, the numbers I've seen range between 2% and 6% of high school graduates are actually registered apprentices in programs. So we need to up our game big time. I mean, in Germany, 50% of young people coming out of what we would, the equivalent of high school, are registered apprentices.
50%?
50%.
What are we in Ontario?
We're between 2 and 6, somewhere in there.
Really?
Coming out of high school.
I'd like to add to that, as an educator, we have all these unfilled positions, and yet we have underemployment of highly educated young people. There's a real mismatch. So again, this goes to the bigger infrastructure issue, immigration, training. The ministers have to get together, I think, and devise a plan that looks at all of these sectors in a cohesive way and not in silos, which all governments work in silos, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we also have to consider the demographics. We have an aging population. We don't have near as many young people coming in. A lot of the young people in Canada are, like you say, more highly educated, so they're moving into some of those more high-skilled jobs. So I think we've got to take a real look, but I think there's a hole that's going to be filled by immigration, whether it be temporary or permanent immigrants to the country that are going to actually fill those jobs and create wealth for the rest of Canada. Because we've got to remember, this is not an isolated thing. And there's an interdependence between the people that are filling the jobs that are immigrants and Canadians, that their job wouldn't exist if that other person wasn't doing that job.
Well, following up on what Philip said a while ago, apparently this was not a big controversy as long as the jobs that were being performed were jobs that Canadians didn't want to do. But when that became less apparent, this became controversial. And I don't know how helpful this poll is going to be, but let's put it up here anyway. The Globe and Mail and Nick Nanos did a poll on the question of allowing temporary foreign workers into Canada while Canadians qualified for those same jobs are looking for work. And here's what they found out. 45% of the people were opposed, 29% somewhat opposed. You see the support, only 17% plus, I guess, 17% somewhat supportive, 7% supportive, so only 24% altogether of people who approve of the idea of allowing temporary foreign workers into Canada. Marie, when you were in your political days, you used to have to deal with polls all the time, reading them and figuring out what they meant. What does that say to you?
I think some polls give not misinformation, but they give the questions in such a way without the context. Again, if you don't have Canadians taking those jobs, regardless of what we think should happen, then who is going to take those jobs? How are those businesses going to survive? So that I would say, look at the whole context of the poll before we make rash political decisions. And also, sometimes governments lead, and we don't always lead by polls. Sometimes you have to take a leadership risk and say, this is what's important for the future of the country. And if that means that I will lose in popularity in the short term, or maybe even in the long term, so be it. We have to do something for the good of the country. And this is important for the future of the country. I want to add one thing to what Mr. Bonet said. If there's one thing that can help having this temporary workers program feed into a possibly longer term immigration process is to get rid of the 4-year in, 4-year out rule, where you can only be a temporary worker for 4 years and then you have to leave.
You don't like that?
I don't like that, no, because if you're here for 4 years and you're employed consistently for 4 years, it means that you're needed in this country. Why make those people that we've managed to integrate somewhat into Canadian society to say, now you have to leave? I just think that's short. I understand why they did it, but I think now with the needs, I think we have to revisit that, and I hope the minister does.
Is that enforced?
Oh, yeah.
It is enforced, eh? Once you've done your 4 years, you're gone?
If you don't enforce, the employers here can better answer that, but my understanding is if you don't enforce any of these rules, you're put on a black list, and then you cannot take advantage of this program in the future.
I think the government recognized there were some problems because they did grant some extension to seafood plants and things like that. I'm glad you brought up the 48-month rule, because even with the immigration policy, that actually cut some people off that were here. They'd been here for 48 months. They were in the process of trying to become permanent immigrants, but they hadn't got through that complex system yet. So by imposing a rule like that arbitrarily, you've cut off people that could be a permanent employee.
Well, again, let's remind everybody, and Philip, I'll bring you in at this point because you're good on helping us with the history here. This became a big thing when Royal Bank, RBC, tried to take advantage of a temporary foreign worker program, and the whole thing exploded in their face. This is a few years ago. Remind us of the details of that.
I think they were hiring a computer programmer, and they hired a temporary foreign worker, and this was clearly an area in which if they had been willing to pay the going wage, they probably could have been able to find somebody. So there were some other high-profile cases too, though, involving, I remember there was a restaurant worker out in Saskatchewan. So it's a real hot-button issue. It's easy to point to individual cases and get people worked up about that. But what isn't reflected in these polls, for example, is you don't ask people, if you don't want temporary foreign workers, are you willing to pay substantially more for your apples?
And
when
the
you
answer
go to
that
the
would
market, and
probably
then
be-
you'd get a much different answer.
Right. So let's draw that connection. We pay as little for food as we do, in part because of this program. Is that
Very
fair
much
to say?
so. Oh, very much so in agriculture.
You're going to endorse that
Well,
too?
I wouldn't say it's quite that black and white. Agriculture is very competitive. We're competing against countries all around the world, and our labor costs have to be in line with what their labor costs are. So however we do it, we have to have that. But I don't think it's all about wages either, because I know some farmers that are paying very high wages to keep long-term employees in place because they're getting the productivity out of those employees. Because it's not, I don't think it's a simple straight line to say food is cheap just because of temporary
No.
foreign workers.
There's other factors, of course.
There's a whole series of other factors that are there. But I think the big issue is the fact that there's a vacuum of jobs there. We need something to fill that. Temporary foreign worker programs are going to have to be there for some time to fill that. But at the same time, if we're going to fill those long-term jobs, we need to make some of those longer-term changes to
Okay, let's play a
labor
clip
policy.
here. I'm going to invite you all to look up at the monitors up at the seal, up in the heavens there. Sean Silkoff from the Globe and Mail came on this program at the time that the RBC thing became a controversy, and we talked about it a bit with him. Let's roll a clip from that interview, Sheldon.
Is this actually being done to alleviate a temporary problem, or is this becoming an alternative stream for employers to hire non-Canadians at lower wages and sort of fuel this migrant worker population in Canada like we've seen happen in Europe? And this brings up some troubling talking points, like are we going to create social problems if the migrant workers, once they come here, decide that they don't want to go home? I mean, this has been a problem it's been a rampant problem in Europe, for example.
Marie, let me get you to start off on this because he put his finger absolutely on what the big controversy here is. How do you think it all worked out in terms of, have we in essence created a sort of cheap labor stream that exploits these people and isn't what it's supposed to be?
I don't think we can generalize and say that. If there are individual employers who have done that, they should be brought to justice. We don't want to be a Qatar or countries that do that quite openly and make no apologies about treating people like slaves. And that's not what Canada's about. And I think if that was one of the motivating factors for the previous government, good for them for wanting to change that. But again, getting back to your poll and this point and politics, it's usually without context. One example shouldn't paint the whole issue with one brush. So yes, I remember that bank example, and that was unfortunate, but it was taken out of context. Like that is how it's done throughout this program, and therefore we're going to change the program. Having been in politics, I understand the pressures, however, of the former or in any government in wanting to address very quickly a situation when it comes up, particularly this kind of situation.
Because that's what happens, right? There was literally a handful of jobs where there may have been some controversy involved, and the Royal Bank's probably got tens upon tens of thousands of employees, and yet they had to take full-page ads out in the newspapers to defend themselves against what was going on here.
Correct, and therefore the government felt they had to respond.
Yeah.
I think if you looked at the numbers, it'd probably be way less than 1% of the temporary foreign workers were affected by some of those problems. I mean,
But do you think it has been abused over the years?
In a couple of situations it has, but relative to the totality of the amount of foreign workers we have working in Canada, it's almost statistically irrelevant. But that's not the way the media works, right? You get onto this thing and then the fear starts up, the pitchforks come out, the torches get lit, and all Canadian jobs are being taken away by these dastardly foreign workers and the devious employers that are behind it.
And all of a sudden you're on the set of Young Frankenstein.
That's right.
There we go.
One of the reforms brought in 2014 that a lot of people don't appreciate is that 25% of all the TFWs in Canada are supposed to be inspected by the federal government. So they really substantially increase inspections after that. So, and I haven't heard of a raft of abuses coming out of these inspector reports.
The only thing I've heard is that it's quite bureaucratic for the employer. I think they could do some work to streamline some of the reporting mechanisms that they have, because I think it's good to have an audit system in place to keep the system working the way it's supposed to be. But but I think you made a really valid point. With all of these inspections, you'd think if everything was a tragedy, there would have been something in the press by now. And there hasn't been.
Sorry, this reminds me of the unpaid internship issue.
Yes.
And especially in the United States, where if you're an unpaid intern and you're hiring unpaid interns, you can really be liable. And I remember it well because that was the time when my daughter was about to go on a plane to do an unpaid internship in California. And we had to do all sorts of paperwork to make sure that her employer did not get into trouble. But again, unpaid internships are a way of young people getting experience. And in the same way, coming to Canada through this door is not the most ideal, doing jobs that no one else will do. But that's what immigrants do. That's what my parents did. That's what a lot of our parents did.
Exactly.
And then they progressed, and their children did very well, and so forth. And the country did well as a result. We have to look at the big picture.
Richard, you want to add?
Well, I was just going to say, I've seen some analysis done on wages and the effect on wages by the temporary foreign worker program, and it's not there. Like, you know, for example, in the construction industry, we've had very respectable increases in wages over the last 10, 15, 20 years. You know, that wasn't affected by this, and I think it's the same for other sectors by and large as well too. So, so I don't think that holds any water.
But Marie, I mean, you're a former cabinet minister, so I want you to put that hat of yours back on for a second here and
I'll
give
try
us.
and remember.
It wasn't that long ago. Come on. The federal government right now has a minister in charge of figuring all this out. She has to find the balance between making sure that this program, you know, does not seem to be cheating for Canadians who want jobs, and obviously respects the needs of the workers in question, respects the needs of the businesses in question. It is, boy, is it a tricky balancing act, right? To find the right balance.
Absolutely.
How do you begin to do that?
Well, she has to get good information, good research, good data to dispel the myths, number one. She has to get supporters around the table, around her, when she devises the policy, not just do it with her bureaucrats. And then she also has to have supporters around the table or at the podium when she's making the announcement. People from all sectors, including some temporary workers who talk about how it's changed their lives. That's how I would do it if I was her.
And even if she did all of that, you know there would be people in the next day criticizing it, saying you forgot about this, that, and the other thing.
Right, and we have an American election right now which highlights things in a nasty way, and so there are a lot of things being said that ordinarily would not be said. So we have to. She has that challenge as well to
I'd like
address.
to add to what you're saying, because sometimes the good news stories don't get spread. We have the seasonal worker program that has been in place for 50 years and has worked really well. I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to chair a session where officials from the government in Jamaica and the Caribbean countries came in. And I was blown away. They said this is the best program that has ever been put in place for their countries. People are coming over to Canada, they're working for the summer on farms in Canada. They're going back with wages. That has been the best economic development country for that region of the world of any, because they've got pride. They're putting the money into education for their kids. They were saying there's more nurses, doctors, and lawyers have been created by the fact that their parents came over and worked in Canada on those seasonal jobs. So I think sometimes we don't hear some of those good news stories about employees who have come over, they've worked for the summer, they've gone back, and that created wealth for those families in countries that had very low standards of living.
Philip.
I'm going to add in one criticism of the business sector here, and that is that a lot of the times businesses want to bring in a person perfect for that job. This is partly related to businesses don't train people much anymore. They search in the internet, they want the perfect candidate. If they can't get that, they get the TFW. We don't spend enough time thinking, well, we got somebody who's got the basic skills and aptitudes. With a little training, we could bring them up to speed.
Who is a Canadian?
Who is a Canadian.
I understand. Do you think, we're down to our last minute here, do you think there is a consensus out there to be had between the workers themselves, businesses, and members of the public who want to have confidence that this program actually does what it claims it does?
I don't think at the moment there's a consensus. I think this is a classic issue of where you stand depends on where you sit. Very clearly, people in the business community have a particular view. People in the labor community have a diametrically opposed view. It's very hard to see a consensus involving on this. I think that's a shame because I think, as this tape was indicated, clearly there are instances in which this program is vitally important. But there are other instances that if we focus too much on short-term solutions, we'll take our eye off the long-term problems that everywhere here is noted.
Well, I want to thank the four of you for sitting where you have sat for the last half hour and helping us understand this issue a whole lot better. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.